Good afternoon, and thank you all for attending our monthly webinar. As Helen just noted, I'm Victoria Melendez, a JASA Program Committee member, working alongside Amy Poster and Allison Tolman. For those of you who are new to JASA, the organization is a volunteer and member-led group that promotes the study and appreciation of Japanese art and culture. In addition to having the opportunity to attend in-person events and trips, our members also receive a copy of the beautiful and scholarly JASA publication entitled Impressions, which is published twice per year. Now, without further ado, please allow me to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Janice Katz. Dr. Katz is a Roger L. Weston Curator of Japanese Art at the Art Institute of Chicago. She received her PhD from Princeton University. She's been with the museum for over 23 years, where she curates quarterly exhibitions of Japanese prints. Her other research focuses on paintings from the Edo period and the history of art collecting in Japan. Her special exhibitions and publications include Japanese Paintings in the Ashmolean Museum, Oxford, published in 2003, Beyond Golden Clouds, Japanese Screens from the Art Institute of Chicago and the St. Louis Museum of Art, or I should say St. Louis Art Museum, published in 2009, Painting the Floating World, Ukiyo-e Masterpieces from the Weston Collection, published in 2018, and Radical Clay, Contemporary Women Artists from Japan. Thank you, Dr. Katz.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you so much, Allison, Victoria, and Amy, for the invitation to speak to JASA virtually on the occasion of the Art Institute's exhibition of Hamanishi Katsunori's Mezzotints. I also want to thank Helen for her much-needed technical assistance, which has been wonderful. I think that the ability to do these talks virtually is so important to reach a wide audience in a timely way, and I really appreciate, as a member, JASA's programming, and I'm so glad to be a part of it. So thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. This is the third solo exhibition of Hamanishi's work at the Art Institute. The current exhibition is called Emerging from Darkness and will run until June 22nd. It contains many different works that from what we've shown before in the two previous solo shows we've had of Hamanishi's work, first in 2014 and then in 2019. All of these have been drawn from our permanent collection. The most notable new inclusion in this exhibition is Hamanishi's series from 2022 entitled Four Seasons, which he gifted to the museum. And I'll be talking primarily about this series today, especially at the beginning of my talk. Now, when the artist contacted me with this wonderful offer of giving us his entire 4 prints from this new series, I quickly checked that we had enough room to store them, because as you can see, each image is very large. And actually, what you're seeing, so for each image, it's actually made up of 3 sheets of paper. So that really helped us a lot in terms of our storage. The framing considerations came later. I was really glad that we were able to frame them wonderfully. But it was an offer that was made and accepted very, very quickly. I had been an admirer of his mezzotint prints, but this series in particular spoke to me since it was reminiscent of pre-modern folding screen paintings that show seasonal flora, which I wrote about in my doctoral thesis. And I've since learned that both Hamanishi and I studied with Kono Motoaki, the renowned art history professor focusing on early modern painting. And I think it's really not a surprise at all that I gravitated towards this series in particular so strongly. You can see that each print has 6 panels of imagery. So each panel represents a plate, and I'll talk about the mezzotint process in a second. But each panel represents a plate, and like I said, there are 2 plates printed on each sheet of paper. And when you put them all together with the right spacing, it looks like a contiguous composition here. And the panels are made explicit because they're offset. They don't really line up. And this is reminiscent of when you would fold a folding screen, I imagine, with the panels at different angles. But the choices of which imagery to use for each season is not something that you see very commonly in pre-modern painting. And so I had thought that it was quite each season, the imagery was quite a personal choice for Hamanishi. So I contacted him and I asked him exactly what he was thinking, for each season. And he told me that he had conceived of the series for the 100th anniversary of the annual Shunyokai Society exhibition, which is held every year at the Tokyo Metropolitan Art Museum. And he had been part of that exhibition when he had first entered it when he was a senior at university. And this was such an important event for him to have his work critiqued and hung alongside those of his teachers. And so for the anniversary, he wanted to create something meaningful that looked back on his career and also set a direction for it going forward. And this set was done for that exhibition in 2022, and he started it in 2019. And since Hamanishi's work involves long periods of sitting at a desk, which he starts doing at 4 a.m. every day, he has taken to walking around in the evening to help his back. And the scenes in the series are places that he visited and he encountered in each of the 4 seasons. So I'd like to dwell a bit on this series, which takes up the majority of the wall space in the exhibition, and which I also think is quite extraordinary. So here I'm showing you spring. It has canola flowers and white butterflies. The palette of colors is quite restrained, ranging from green leaves on the bottom to the bright white of the butterflies that are floating above. And the leaves seem to glisten in the sunlight, although the sky is completely black. I find this very interesting because that background area, that sky area, is the area that would be gold, that would be covered with gold leaf in a pre-modern screen. In fact, this print and the others in the series are studies of light and how light falls on the plants. Each butterfly is either bright white or it's in shadow, depending on how far it is from the viewer. So in addition to Hamanishi's expert rendering of light, his rendering of depth is also extraordinary, even more so when you consider how mezzotints are created, which I'll get to in a second. So here is a detail. And it is so interesting that from afar, when you've stepped back a bit, the images are so photorealistic. They look like photographs. But when you're up close like this, you see the hand-drawn nature of them. And, they clearly look like hand-drawn illustration. So of this image, Hamanishi says, I found a cluster of canola flowers in a vacant rice field that had been harvested in the autumn. Spring is a season where yellow flowers like dandelions and freesias stand out in particular. I chose canola flower fields with flying cabbage butterflies as the subject because they epitomize spring. Now, summer is a pond with lotuses, and it has a bit more color. Sorry about the jumping around. Has a bit more color in the pink of the lotus flowers. The fish swim in the water, which is white, and it has this kind of cross-hatching pattern, cross-hatching texture to it, with the same attention to this light and depth. It looks like light is just emanating from the water. I find it incredibly beautiful. Hamanishi writes, since the Japanese summer is so hot and humid, I wanted to go to a lake or somewhere cool with water. I went to Shinobazu Pond in Ueno. I used as my subject the large, round, dark green leaves spreading across the pond from the mud at the bottom, and, and the white and pale pink lotus flowers blooming in various places. To create a sense of movement in the scene, I added willow leaves swaying in the wind and the carp swimming beneath the water surface. Now, fall is my absolute favorite from the series. Here you have white and red spider lilies, which are called manju shage or manju shaka, which Hamanishi translates to flowers of heaven. And they have these wispy petals that just peek out from the darkness. Hamanishi's studio is at the foot of the Tanzawa Mountains, and this scene was one of the first one he created for the series. He says, deep red or pure white spider lilies are planted by farmers on the edge of neighborhood fields. The roots of the flowers contain toxins, which eat away at the roots of the old crops. I heard that they're also planted to keep moles and other small animals away. In my hometown in Hokkaido, this flower doesn't grow. When I moved to the suburbs of Tokyo and first saw them, the red spider lilies made a very strong impression. And I think that you can feel that in this image. Interestingly, this flower is associated in Japan with parting and with death, as well as reincarnation, since they bloom during the fall equinox. So they're seen as this link between this world and the next, or this season and the next. And the flower is also very popular among younger visitors because it features in anime series, in particular Demon Slayer, which my daughter watches. And so when this comes up in the introduction, I was, oh my goodness, it's spider lilies. So I suddenly understood why people were gravitating towards this image so much. And in winter, this contrast of black and white is best seen with the snow-covered landscape, where the snow is defining each leaf, each branch, and bright red camellia flowers catch your eye when you're in front of the work. Hamanishi's explanation here is the area where my house is located is relatively mild in the winter, but even so, there's snow a few times a year. And for this 4-part series, I wanted to include the contrast between the white winter snow and the vivid red of the camellia flowers. Snowy scenes are rare, but on this evening when it did snow, I went out for a walk and was captivated by the green leaves of the camellia bushes and its bright red flowers that led to this work. So I was really glad to be able to contact him and get his explanation for the very interesting subject matter in the series. He's done quite a few series based on the 4 seasons, but each one has very specific imagery for those seasons. So I think that was really, really helpful. Now, all of these works and all of Hamanishi's works are defined by darkness, by black, because they are mezzotints. Literally, mezzotint means half tone, right? Half tint. In French, it's called the manière noire, and it's a technique developed in Germany in the 1600s. It was popularized in France to create portraits and also to do copies of well-known paintings, mostly for book illustrations. Exceeding all printing methods before or since in the technique's ability to render grayscale, velvety blacks and bright whites, and everything in between with this photographic-like clarity. Indeed, it was photography that led to the eclipse of mezzotints in the 19th century. It's an intaglio process. So a metal, usually a copper plate, is etched into, and it's reductive in that the entire plate is rocked. And I'll show you a video about that in a second. The entire plate is rocked to hold the ink, to create these burrs that stand up from the surface that hold the ink with a tool known as a rocker. And that is the area that appears the darkest black when the image is printed. And then in order to draw the pictorial image into the plate, various tools are used. I'm showing you some tools from the artist website on top. Various tools are used to smooth out those areas, to push down those burrs. And the smoothest areas, which are usually burnished, come out white. And so you can see in the image that I have at lower left that that area of the plate that has been smoothed down becomes white, right? And this is an enormously time-consuming process. When we first had Hamanishi's work on view in 2014, we showed plates and tools that are used for mezzotint. And I found it very helpful to be able to describe to people how the technique was done, because it's not very intuitive, I don't think. And to say that making a mezzotint, even the smallest one, is painstaking is an understatement. And remember the latest series that I showed you by Hamanishi is really quite large. Each of the plates are quite large. And according to him, it takes 10 to 13 hours to prepare a mezzotint plate, to prepare the ground for a typical kind of letter-sized sheet of plate. And he runs the rocker. Sometimes you have to switch the rocker because there are different gauges, but he runs it in all directions: horizontal, vertical, diagonal. He's also known to create his own tools. I believe he's also innovated being able to use a rocker that runs on a pedal that he has, in order to save himself a little bit of effort, but it doesn't really save that much time. And so I'd like to show you now the best short video, it's 2 minutes long, that I could find to show you just how extensive the process is to prepare a plate, to rock a plate. You really have to see it to believe it. I myself knew about the process, but didn't quite appreciate it until I saw everything that was involved. I'm going to mute the video because the music is a little bit distracting, but I'll narrate it as we go along. And this is a video that I found online. It is not Hamanishi, although I do have a video of Hamanishi doing a demonstration later on in my talk. So here the artist is using one of these wooden handles. It makes it easier than like grabbing onto a handle like you would for a paintbrush, let's say, and using weights on the front part of the rocker tool, which keeps the rocker moving in one direction more easily. And she has a mat there that she uses as a guide to run the rocker in 12 different angles, and she does each one twice. So she does 24 of these angled passes, and she just goes along the entire plate for each of those angles. And so she has this mat to help her, and she rocks each of these angles in several rows that overlap, so that there's no area that gets skipped. And so she starts from one edge and goes all the way to the other side of the plate, and then starts a new row underneath that. And she does that for each of the angles. And here she's sped it up a little bit so you can see that. Hamanishi, like I said, has innovated his tools and his methods to save himself a little bit of time. There are many of his images have this dark velvety black, which you can only get from doing this complete rocking in all these different angles. Others of his work has the plate partially rocked. And so he has really played around quite a bit with the technique, even adding color, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. And so you can see the area of all the incisions going all the different directions. That creates a very velvety black. So perhaps more than any living artist, Hamanishi has explored the and maximized the creative potential of the mezzotint medium. He's done over 700 works, probably closer to 800 by now, from small to large, and I can only show you a few. Although much has been written about his work, each image is so thoughtful in terms of its subject matter and its technique. So I'm going to focus on just a handful of his prints that are, for the most part, in the Art Institute's collection. His earliest works of the 1970s, or I'm showing you a piece here on the left, are characterized by rendering sculptural models in dazzling three dimensions. He actually didn't start off making mezzotints. He was studying education, actually has an educational degree from his university, but he was creating works almost nonstop, and he was allowed to sort of do an art degree, and certainly did work with many different professors. He started with oil painting, he did woodblock printing, he did etching, aquatint, mezzotint. Sometimes he combined all of these techniques. But Hamanishi himself will say that one of his earliest teachers and a huge, huge influence on him was his teacher that was a sculptor. And Hamanishi turned towards creating these sculptural models in clay or in wood as a way to create, and using a light source as a way to kind of experiment with creating these three dimensions in print. And with this Setsugo series that you see on the left, you'll see the same three models done from various different angles. He's got a print where you can see it from an aerial view, and from different angles, all using the same three models of a square, of a circle on top, then a square, and then a triangle on the bottom. And Hamanishi finally turned towards mezzotints when he was around 30 years old. If you've seen him talk before, he'll say that with the birth of his child, he didn't want the harsh chemicals around in the home, which was, kind of a small space where he lived and worked. And so he turned towards mezzotints instead. And these models are somewhat conceived of because of his son's toys, the blocks that children play with. And it's I think it's a really fascinating way how personal. I mean, these images seem like they are in a way objective and looking into light and in shapes and geometry, but really there's just such a personal reason behind his subjects, which I find very endearing. Um, and these prints very effectively convey either the wood material or the clay or the metal, which you can see on the right, and the fabric that he used to create these models. And the round trip print that I'm showing you on the right is actually, it looks like a smooth metallic shape, but Hamanishi was really looking for a round shape to use as a model and had a very hard time finding the right size and the right shape until he discovered a fluorescent bulb at home. He said, this is perfect. And so he ended up using that for his round shape. And in this case, in round trip, he has knotted a rope around it. And he has many works that are called Round Trip in the series with the various kinds of knots using this rope. Rope is another kind of mainstay motif for Hamanishi, which is something that is very practical, used by fishermen, but also the idea of rope to demarcate sacred space and normal space in Japan, or to delineate a sacred tree, or even used as the entrance to a shop to delineate, when it's a rope curtain. The outside and the inside is something that he's really very, very interested in. And these ropes are quite ubiquitous in his work from the time of the 1980s going forward. The 1980s were a time when Hamanishi's first works entered the Art Institute's collection from that of Sheldon and Ninion Landy, when the curator was Osamu Ueda at the time. I'll speak more about all of them later. And this is the first work of Hamanishi's that entered the collection. And you can see this fascination with texture, the smooth tubes covered with the paper and then with the wire, these studies that he does. So from geometric models and ropes, knots, Hamanishi began using branches and string in his work around 1985. We have a few works from this period and from this series, thanks to the Landys. The late 80s also saw him introduce color into his prints. And here's a work from the Situation series. And you can see he has these branches and also this cord that has this reddish coloring, although the coloring is a little bit muted. And Hamanishi usually credits seeing the painter Barnett Newman's work at MoMA when he was a visiting artist in Philadelphia, University of Pennsylvania, and traveling to New York to see the artist's work. And that was in 1987, 88. This work predates that. But it doesn't have that kind of bright color that would come to characterize Hamanishi's work later on, that he credits the inspiration for being him seeing Barnett Newman's work in New York. But it also, the introduction of color for Hamanishi also came at a time when he was really looking to change his style as well. And he considered his time in the US as kind of a fresh start. And adding color to mezzotints is something that had been done in Europe. In Japan in the 20th century, it was explored by another artist, Hamaguchi Yozo, who spent much of his career in France. And often Hamanishi's works are shown together with Hamaguchi's, as in the excellent Freer exhibition of 2012 called The Art of Darkness, where there were works shown from the Hitch collection, which is the same collector as the Worcester Museum's exhibition of Hamanishi and Hamaguchi's work that was in 2004. But I think it's safe to say that Hamanishi, more so than his predecessor, it uses a range of colors, and it's absolutely exceptional. And this work with relatively muted light color directly precedes his Division series, in which bright areas of red are introduced. And in the current exhibition, we have 3 works from this period, from this series, including this one on the left that has lead leaf. Probably he uses gesso as well to create this kind of embossing look as well. And this bright color can't be achieved using the mezzotint process. So Hamanishi innovated using um, an aquatint using a separate aluminum plate with an aquatint process. And that process using oil paints as well leaves a very vivid, very even color on the surface. And I have a video showing you that later. These designs are a bit more two-dimensional, a bit more mathematic than the ones that came before. Hamanishi says that he had a compass on his desk and creating these geometric curve forms. But even when he was exploring, geometry, color blocking, his works are never entirely abstract. And you see this very realistic rendering of these branches and of the ropes. Hamanishi had visited Chicago several times before 1997 when he did his landmark Viva Chicago series. But this was done around the time when he was in residence at Bradley College in Peoria, Illinois. And with the set is his text describing his motivation for creating the series. That is based on a set of public sculptures, which every Chicagoan is familiar with. Downtown, they're in a few block radius of each other. And so I just want to read to you briefly that text written by Hamanishi. He says, Chicago, the great metropolis located along the banks of Lake Michigan, blessed with such beautiful architecture and sculptures from its historic past. When I came here, I was unprepared for the impact this city would leave on my mind, such a vivid impression etched deep in my memory. In the succession of visits here, the observation of the cityscape became one of my main focal points. But as time passes and the succession of visits increases, my initial impression fades. For me, the time has come to capture my initial impression of my first trip. This is my ode to Chicago. So that is my ode to Chicago as well. And we'll talk a lot more about Hamanishi and his relationship with Chicago also. But it's not a coincidence, again, that sculpture is what catches his eye. These works, like I said, are familiar to every Chicagoan and everyone who visits the city. You've got on the right, Marina City, called the Corn Cob Buildings by Bertrand Goldberg. The Picasso sculpture that's outside the Daly Center, the Dubuffet, and then on the left, Water Tower. So I'm showing you these 4 here, but there are actually 7 in the series. I think it's very fitting to have this set up at the museum since the Art Institute owns the maquettes for many of these sculptures that were done by Picasso. There's one by Miro, there's one by Calder. I don't know if Hamanishi actually knows that we have these maquettes and supplementary materials, but as a curator, I think it's a really wonderful crossover between areas of the museum to have these. And I am trying to forward my slides, and it is not working. So maybe I need to go out and come back in. I'll do that. All right, sorry, technical issues, just one moment. Okay. Still having issues. And
Do you need me to take over, Janice? I can share my
yeah, that'd be
screen.
great. Thank you so much.
Sure, give me 1 second.
We made it most of the way through without a technical
Let's
issue.
let me see. Hopefully I'm on the right slide, but you can just tell me to advance.
Sure.
Okay. Slide.
Thank you. That's perfect.
Great.
So here you have Hamanishi's work on the left. We actually have the maquette of the Picasso sculpture that was given to us by the artist. And we also have some drawings for this sculpture. Now, this is not a sculpture that is, universally loved. You either love it or you hate it. Hamanishi clearly loved it, which is great. The sculpture itself was unveiled in 1967. And if I could have the next slide, this Dubuffet maquette on the right is not the same work as the public sculpture, but it's very similar. We had this on view for many years in front of our Chagall windows, as you can see. And Hamanishi, I think, very faithfully captured every angle of this faceted surface. The Dubuffet work that you see in the print was actually unveiled in 1984 in front of the Thompson Center, for those of you who know Chicago. And next slide, please. This set is always included in full in every exhibition that we have of Hamanishi's work, with the full text beside it. And talking about crossovers, we have about 800 mezzotints total in the Art Institute's collection, which is very interesting when I went into our database and looked into that. Most of them are by an American artist, Vera Burdich, from the 1950s and 60s, but they're also notable 19th century works. There's also 17th century Dutch mezzotints. There are contemporary mezzotints by Cy Twombly. Of Japanese mezzotints, we have works by Saito Kaori, Ikeda Masuo, and of course Hamaguchi Yozo. Next slide, please. In the late 90s to the early 2000s, Hamanishi began to focus on traditional subjects such as origami, like I'm showing you here on the right, which explores the texture of paper, and his work on the left entitled Kotobuki, a long life, that has the symbol for long life on there. Looks like a decoration for the new year. This is actually done with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different plates. So the lines that you see there are not lines that have been etched into the plate, but it's actually a blank area of paper. He prints on 5 different plates, but he aligns them. It's kind of like a jigsaw puzzle, and prints them all at the same time. Can I have the next slide, please? Thanks. These works focusing on kimono were inspired by his son's wedding, which I believe was in 2012 or maybe 2013, and they show a gradation of color. And they're similar to the tagasode, or whose sleeves screens that you get in the pre-modern period in Japan. And there are so many of his traditional kind of call outs of these pre-modern subjects that you get on folding screens, such as floating fans in the Four Seasons. And I'm a big fan of all of those. Unfortunately, we don't have so many representations of all this different kind of traditional subject matter, but we do have quite a few of the kimono works. And if I could show the next one. Thanks. And this is one that's called Kimono Four Seasons. It's done on 3 separate sheets of paper. And this was generously funded by Mac and Carol Trapp when we had the first exhibition of Hamanishi's work at the museum in 2014. And if you look closely, you can see that on the kimono, the way that the plate has been rocked shows a kind of cross-hatching pattern that sort of looks like fabric, which is absolutely amazing. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to show you in a moment, not just yet, I'm going to show a short video of a demonstration that we had in Chicago during this first exhibition of Hamanishi's work in 2014, which is very instructive. And before I show it, I just want to give you a little bit of context for that visit of his. And it was through the help of my colleagues at the School of the Art Institute in the printing department. They were very enthusiastic from the start, and we were able to invite Hamanishi to engage with the students there during their classes, as well as give a demonstration one evening to our Japanese art interest group. And he was thrilled to do so, of course. Like many art schools, even though the School of the Art Institute has an amazing print department, they do not teach mezzotint, and that's something that it happens quite often, as Hamanishi will tell you. And I think that his commitment to teaching, of course, comes from him having that education degree, and he is such a wonderful teacher and educator, and it's very important for him to engage with students when he visits different schools. And so we were really glad to be able to make that happen. And this is a video that was taken by Michael Verne during the demonstration, and I'm going to play it. Not muted, but there are captions, which might be a little hard to read, so I'll narrate as we go. So this video is going to show you how Hamanishi puts color on his prints. And here you have Fuko Ito, who was a student at the time in the printmaking department helping us translate. And so Hamanishi is showing the separate aluminum plates that he uses cut out to the shape of the colors that he wants to print, that he will print first. He prints his areas of color, and then he prints the mezzotint plate. Like I said, the colors that he uses are oil paints. You don't have to wipe the plate. The aluminum plate with the colors is not one that has to be wiped, like a mezzotint plate has to be wiped in order to bring out all the nuances of the incising and the etching and the burnishing. And so you can see the finished print on the left. There's actually one aluminum plate that's used to put down two colors. There's a bit of a purplish color on top and then a yellow color on the bottom. And that's this gradation. He calls it a rainbow roll, where he is making both of those colors blend together. It reminds me kind of bokashi on woodblock printing. And he does that with a brayer, it's a roller, and he combines, those two colors. And then for the orange, he puts it on in one solid layer, so there's no gradation going on there. And he'll hold up the finished print. And then you'll also be able to see him using the printer that he'll feed the work into the printer machine, and he'll crank the roller. Hopefully the video is playing a little bit more smoothly for you than it is for me. So he has to wipe the mezzotint plate in order to bring out all of the nuances. And that's the copper plate that you see there. And I think maybe because we're short on time, maybe if we can kind of skip ahead to the end where he holds up the finished work. There he goes, feeding it into the printer machine. And you have to be very careful with the mezzotint. The surface is quite fragile. There you go. There's his finished work. Thanks for staying with me on that one. Let's go to the next slide. So the collection of Hamanishi's works at the museum is largely based on this landmark gift in 2013 from Sheldon and Ninion Landy. That's Sheldon Landy over there on the left. The Landy have been major supporters of Hamanishi's work, and they gifted over 30 prints to us that year, ranging in date from 1978 to 2008, including the Viva Chicago series. And this really put the collection of Hamanishi's work at the Art Institute on the map. It was preceded by a few important early works from the Landys that came in during the time of my predecessor, Osamu Ueda, dating back to 1985. And here he is receiving some award from the Japanese government. The Art Institute currently holds 43 works by Hamanishi, and we are really very excited to have such a range of works from throughout Hamanishi's very varied, prolific career, and very grateful for the continued gifts. Next slide. And I just want to, in closing, very briefly highlight how meaningful these gifts are for the mission of the Japanese print collection at the Art Institute. The current show of Hamanishi's work is in our Clarence Buckingham Gallery. This is a space that's probably the second biggest draw for the public to the museum as a whole, after the Impressionist masterpieces. It's an important showcase. We get to show our permanent print collection 4 times a year. We rotate it. So the shows are 3 months each. And once a year, we do a show featuring contemporary works. And currently there are about 16,000 Japanese prints in our collection, consisting mostly of the works from the Edo period, 17th through the 19th centuries, but also including about 5,000 20th to 21st century works. It's very important to keep the collection current with gifts from collectors as well as the artists themselves. Next slide, please. So briefly, how did Chicago become a center for Japanese prints? First classical prints and then contemporary prints. I don't think it is any mystery that from the time of the World's Columbian Exposition in 1893, this was the kickoff event. You can see the Japanese National Pavilion in the foreground over there in the image on the left. That really was a revelation for people as they went through that. And Clarence Buckingham, whose sister Kate gave us her brother's prints in 1925, that was the core of our collection, started collecting Japanese prints just the year after the fair in 1894. And it's one of his early acquisitions of a very important and very rare Kagetsudo work that he acquired just a few years later in 1897. Next slide, please. And his curator was Frederick Gukin, and I'm showing you an image from Gukin's amazing cataloging of the Buckingham collection. And this is his catalog page for the Kagetsudo print that I showed you before. We have a series of these catalogs, just an incredible resource. Next slide, please. And in 1908, as well as 1912, we had exhibitions that were lending largely from the work of the collection of Frank Lloyd Wright, but also, of course, Clarence Buckingham and others, that was curated by Frederick Gukin and Frank Lloyd Wright. And these images are just incredible. Wright himself created the planters and the design for the exhibition, the furniture and everything. Next slide, please. And Kate is Clarence's sister, who is the one who kind of took up the mantle after her brother's death in adding really important works to the collection, most notably this Harunobu series of the 8 parlor views, as well as very, very important works by Sharaku. Next slide, please. And into the 20th century, the Art Institute's collection was really a focal point, thanks to Oliver Statler and the Ehrenbergs, for 20th century prints, the Sosaku Hanga, for which there were very, very early exhibitions. And the Art Institute has a great collection of this early Sosaku Hanga, in particular Onchi Koshiro's work. Next slide, please. So I want to end by making some comments on Hamanishi's unique place in Japanese prints of the 20th to 21st centuries. Only a few artists can boast such a long, varied, and international career. He stands apart for his constant innovation in technique as well as subject matter. And whether it's because mezzotints are so incredibly challenging or no one can come close to his inventiveness, he remains one of the few artists today whose main output is mezzotints. He prints all of his own works, which is also not always the case. Like the most successful artists, his work is deeply personal, shaped by his family, his friends, and his teachers. And most artists at this stage in their career, they do work that is not always surprising. With Hamanishi, though, you have no idea what he's going to do next. I can't wait to see it. So with that, I'll conclude and say thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take questions.
Janice, thank you so much. What a wonderful talk. And I learned so much about the artist and also the whole mezzotint process. And it really is very time consuming and very complex and complicated. There have been a number of questions that I'd like to start asking if I may. One is just a general question about can you talk about the contrast of using a Western medium such as mezzotint and Japanese motifs and subjects?
Thank you, Victoria. I find this to be incredibly fascinating to me personally. Not only do you have the characteristic black background for the mezzotints, which is certainly not something that you would see in pre-modern painting, Japanese screens, which more typically would have the gold background. And then you also wouldn't see that same kind of drawing or illustration. You would see more the surface being built up, with various pigments in order to, create these very highly designed works. So in many ways, Hamanishi's work is completely counter to what you would find in a pre-modern folding screen of a similar subject, whether it's kimono or flowers or fans. But what I find similar between them is this incredible exploration of the use of light and this idea of depth as well. And I think that his transposing these traditional subjects into this Western technique of mezzotint is therefore it's done very successfully. I think it's very successful.
It really is. The works are stunning. How large is the Art Institute's collection of Hamanishi?
We have a little over 40 prints. Yeah. And I think in some of the materials that I had sent out earlier, I'd said that we had the largest collection in the US. I'm not sure about that. I mean, Portland got a wonderful large gift as well. So if anyone knows how many prints Portland has, maybe I need to stop saying that, museums love superlatives, but I think I need to walk that one back.
Okay. This is a general question about living artists and how often the Art Institute or you display works by living artists.
Well, like I said, we have about one print rotation exhibition a year in our Clarence Buckingham gallery that focuses on 20 or 21st century artists. And within that, many of the artists that we show are living artists. We sometimes focus on just one artist, like we're doing now with Hamanishi, but more often we focus on a moment in Sosakuhanga, or we talk about portraiture in Sosakuhanga. And so we show a variety of artists, both mid 20th century and also still living. So we do try, though, to show and especially to add the work of living artists. When I go through the collection, I often come across works that were gifted by artists themselves in the 50s and 60s and 70s. And so it's really a tradition that is very important to maintain.
Really, and it's a very long tradition, isn't it? Going back to the 50s. Wow.
Yeah, absolutely.
How does a museum keep its print collection current? I mean, what do you do to?
Well, I would say we're quite opportunistic. Contemporary Japanese art is really not my main mission here. With the print collection, though, I do get to explore the work of many contemporary artists, and the relationships that I have with them makes my work so meaningful. It's one of the best aspects of my work. So I really enjoy that. It's not as if I go around to these contemporary art fairs like the Venice Biennale or anything, and I'm looking for like the one artist to highlight. It's really about relationships and getting to know each artist, whether it's a basket artists working with bamboo or contemporary artists working with paper, or many print artists. It's wonderful to be able to visit them, get to know them, and get to visit their studios, learn about their practice, and see them develop. And I often watch them develop for many years before we would acquire a work from them or before we would receive a gift. Yeah.
Excellent. Now this gets back to Hamanishi's works. How large are the editions that Hamanishi produces?
So he produces works in editions of about 50. Yeah, and there are a few artist proofs as well, which wouldn't count in that numbering. And we have a couple of those from the wonderful Landy collection, which we're very grateful to have.
It's wonderful. Thank you. Covers another question that was asked. And then this is another question just about mezzotints in general and whether or not you and your colleagues at the Art Institute might do a combined show of mezzotint subjects or mezzotints around the world.
It's really interesting. Usually when I'm asked to participate in a print workshop with my colleagues in prints and drawings, which is the Western Prints and Drawings department, they usually want me to talk about woodblock prints. And so we haven't talked about, our mutual interest in mezzotints. I know the Art Institute has done exhibitions of mezzotints before, but I think it would be really interesting. And I've got, really wonderful colleagues, good relationships, and a lot of history of collaborations with prints and drawings. And so I think that could be a really interesting topic for the future.
I think it would be wonderful. Great. Well, I think that this is all we have time for today. It's 2 minutes before the end of the hour. So thank you again for this wonderful talk. And it's just a groundbreaking show and quite stunning. So I can't wait to see it in person. So thank you again.
Thank you so much.
And I am now going to close our webinar and thank all of you for participating in today's event, a recording of which will be posted on the JASA website. Our next webinar is going to be on June 2nd at 5 p.m. on the exhibition entitled Bunmei Kaika, a political landscape in early modern and modern Japan, which runs through June 7th at the Francis Lehman Loeb Art Center at Vassar College in Poughkeepsie. Our speakers will be Chelsea Foxwell, who is professor of art history at the University of Chicago, in conversation with the exhibition's curator, Monique Dalmeida, who is Zechnatel Curatorial Fellow in Japanese Works on Paper. JASA will also be leading a visit to the Princeton Museum of Art next week on May 13th. Please see our website for more details, and thank you all again for attending today's webinar. Until the next time, bye-bye.